Now it's time for today's press review, and the French papers are headlining today on the European Parliament's vote on a key biodiversity bill, and Diptyque Laurent is taking us through it as ever. What are the papers saying about the vote, Dipty?
Well, lots of interesting reactions from there, Stuart. It is, of course, it is the biggest story in the French papers. This Wednesday, European MPs vote on the Nature Restoration Act, which is a central pillar of the bloc's biodiversity bill. It aims to restore degraded ecosystems like forests and marine habitats, and also boost decimated populations of birds, bees, and butterflies. The EU is hoping to make Europe carbon neutral by 2050, but a wave of opposition from the right, the far right, but also farmers and agro-industry lobbies are threatening to upend all of that. And there's also opposition from the right-wing paper Le Figaro today. This editorial from the paper today concedes that saving the planet is important, but the editor slams the EU for yet another strategy that will impose new restrictions and more spending. Now, from Libération, the left-wing paper, meanwhile, this could be the greenest day for the EU or not. The paper fears that the vote could really bury the EU's environment strategy, and also notes that the bill has already been watered down. So the paper really expressing its fears that any kind of rejection would be disastrous for future negotiations with the US and China. Now, one of the proposals in the bill is to replant hay in the countryside, which really has the advantage of attracting insects necessary for farming and also stocking carbon. But their major disadvantage is, of course, taking up land that farmers need and desire for production of other produce. And this is really the focus of the French paper La Croix today, which deplores the fact that Europe, the world's richest region, is not able to lead by example at a time when the effects of climate change are ever more present. That's in the French papers.
Well, on that note of climate change, then, the US papers, they continue to focus on devastating floods and heat across the country.
Yeah, that's right. You have Newsday today headlining on those historic floods in the states of New York and Vermont. The governor of New York, even Kathy Hochul, even warning that the floods are a one-in-a-millennia event with tens of millions of dollars of damage. That impressive photo of a community basically covered by water there, really very impressive, really sort of hitting home just the reality of these terrible floods. Now, in the New York Times, there's also a very interesting article that's well worth a read today. It looks at a rather frightening future of dry states like Arizona. In particular here, this article talks about Phoenix, where heat has become a brutal test of endurance. Phoenix has been experiencing 11 straight days of above 40-degree heat with no end in sight. Such realities where summers are getting longer, starting earlier, ending later in the year, and intensifying in those summer months has really forced locals here to adapt their routines. Runners go for a run at 4 in the morning, and then once they get home, the shutters are brought down pretty much for the whole day. And the article also talks about how these sort of usually bustling populations have become virtual ghost towns at midday, where it's too hot for anyone to venture out. So this article really a very interesting, frightening reality into heat waves, which are often an invisible killer of people, but also community story.
Yeah, it's been bad enough here, and it's only low mid-30s at the moment. Now, some sport for you. Ukrainian tennis player Elina Svitolina is gathering a lot of attention in the sports papers today. This is after her magical win against the world #1 at Wimbledon.
That's right. Elina Svitolina, the Ukrainian player who is actually unseeded, has continued her dream run after a 3-set victory over Iga Świątek, the Polish world #1 at Wimbledon. She's now into the semi-finals, an incredible feat for Elina Svitolina, who gave birth in October last year and has only just returned to the circuit just about 3 months ago. She's actually ranked 76 in the world. She was a wildcard entry for Wimbledon, so it's pretty incredible she's gotten this far. Her win delivers hope to Ukraine. She's obviously been very vocal about the war in Ukraine. In fact, Svitolina has famously refused to shake hands with Russian and Belarusian players at matches. The Independent has a really interesting article about how her success at Wimbledon is so much more than about tennis. Svitolina, for instance, as I said, has been very vocal about the war in Ukraine, but also after childbirth, when she returned to the circuit, she changed her style of tennis to a more aggressive style of play, perhaps a sort of circumstance of her new life, but also the war in Ukraine could have been an influence of the way that her country has changed, and it's paying dividends clearly. She's now a possible favorite to win Wimbledon, which would be an absolute fairy tale run for someone who gave birth, 9 months ago. So.
Amazing if she went all the way, wouldn't it? Finally, from Dipti, she's found an article for us which explains how birds are enacting a kind of sweet revenge on humans, Dipti.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite stories of this Wednesday, Stuart. Birds have never shied away from using human rubbish, for instance, to build nests, but now Dutch researchers have discovered crows and magpies are also using anti-bird spikes to build their nests. Nests found in Rotterdam and Antwerp were found to be constructed almost entirely of metal spikes, the ones used to keep the birds away from urban habitats in the first place. So clearly, instead of getting scared by the spikes, they've just seen a great opportunity to build an even more solid nest, with the added benefit that it actually makes them more attractive to potential mates. So I think the birds are really
hitting back.
They're hitting back. I think it's a revenge of the birds, or it's some sort of bird poetic
Like an
justice.
Alfred Hitchcock film. That's amazing. I was saying earlier, our building on Paris, a lot of them have disappeared. Now I know where they're going.
Yeah, the birds.
Dipti with the papers on France 24. Don't forget, of course, you can catch the press review again in our online podcast as well, www.france24.com.